The Golden State Warriors have extended center Kristaps Porzingis on a new 2-year contract worth $40 million, a move that initially looked like a straightforward win for the veteran big man. On closer inspection, the structure of the deal reveals just how much leverage the front office kept for itself. Only $3 million of salary attached to the 2027-28 season is guaranteed before June 29 of that year, meaning Golden State can walk away from the back half of the contract and shed $17.5 million off next summer's cap sheet if Porzingis fails to deliver. Hey, what's up, everyone? Before we jump into everything today, that like button right there is what decides if this video hits hundreds or thousands of people. 1 second is all it takes, but the impact on this channel is massive. Go ahead and hit that like button right now. Seriously, it's the simplest thing you can do. And honestly, the best way to back this content up, because every single like pushes this further. So hit it now. That detail changes the complexion of the transaction. What appeared to be a strong commitment to a 7-footer who can stretch the floor and protect the rim turns out to be a calculated bet with a built-in exit ramp. The Warriors are paying for upside while limiting downside risk, a pattern increasingly common across the league as front offices grow more sophisticated about contract language. Negotiations of this kind are rarely simple, and both sides clearly had to give ground to get a deal done. For Golden State, the biggest advantage is that Porzingis becomes immediately trade eligible because this was structured as an extension rather than a fresh re-signing using his bird rights. Had the team gone the re-signing route, he would have been frozen from trade talks for several months, a restriction that could have cost the Warriors valuable flexibility during a critical stretch of the offseason. That flexibility matters because the front office has made no secret of its willingness to keep exploring the trade market. If a matching piece becomes available in the coming months, Golden State wants Porzingis available as a trade chip rather than locked in place. There's also a near-term wrinkle. For a short window right now, the Warriors could waive Porzingis and only be charged $3 million against this season's cap. Nobody expects that, but it exists as an emergency lever if a bigger opportunity materializes suddenly. From Porzingis' side, the win is the average annual value. $20 million per year is healthy for a player who has missed roughly 90 regular season games over the past 2 seasons because of various injuries. That durability concern is exactly why some evaluators expected a more modest number. Instead, his camp secured a rate reflecting his shooting gravity and rim protection rather than his availability record. There's a business rationale behind the Warriors' willingness to pay that price, too. A salary near $19.5 million for the 2026-27 season can function as a matching salary in potential trade packages built around targets carrying contracts in the $20 to $30 million range. If Porzingis had signed for significantly less, Golden State would have had a harder time constructing trade offers for higher-priced stars later in the year. The bigger number may actually serve the front office's broader roster-building strategy, even if it looks unusual for a player who has struggled to stay on the floor. As for the light guarantee attached to the second season, that detail leans clearly in the Warriors' favor. Even if Porzingis' camp could argue it beats a scenario with zero guaranteed money at all. Either way, Golden State protected itself against a repeat of the injury pattern that has plagued Porzingis' recent seasons. Evaluating the move requires acknowledging real uncertainty about how much of a difference Porzingis will make on the court. There remains a real chance he simply doesn't log enough healthy minutes to justify the salary attached to his name. His track record over the last 2 years raises legitimate questions about reliability, and even when healthy, his defensive limitations in space could keep him off the floor during crunch time. Still, the bottom line is that Golden State had few alternatives. Letting him walk in free agency would have meant losing him for nothing, since a sign-in trade was extremely unlikely given the 3-year minimum term required for that type of transaction. Rather than watch an asset disappear, the front office chose to preserve it, keeping open the possibility of a package deal down the road. Looking back at the original trade that brought Porzingis to Golden State in exchange for Jonathan Kuminga and other draft capital, some analysts still wish the front office had targeted a player capable of more consistent two-way production. Porzingis remains a dynamic scorer who stretches defenses from deep, but his defensive limitations against smaller, quicker lineups are real and have shown up repeatedly on film. Even so, the Warriors had no other move available this offseason. Without meaningful cap space to pursue outside free agents, their only real financial tools were the biannual exception, already used on a separate backcourt signing, and the mid-level exception. Using those two tools while Porzingis remained under contract was the most logical path forward. The lone lingering complaint is whether Golden State needed to go as high as $19.5 million annually, since little indicates another team was prepared to offer close to that figure. That keeps this from being flawless business. Every other element, from immediate trade eligibility to the modest 2027 to 28 guarantee, reflects careful protective planning. The grade lands solidly in the B+ range, a calculated move balancing short-term stability with long-term financial protection. One of Golden State's biggest edges in the pursuit of LeBron James has always been its ability to offer the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception, a contract slot worth roughly $15 million. Among the handful of teams believed capable of matching that offer, the San Antonio Spurs stood out as arguably the most dangerous threat. That threat has now effectively disappeared. According to ESPN insider Shams Charania, the Spurs use their non-taxpayer mid-level exception to sign forward Tobias Harris to a 2-year contract worth $31 million. Once that exception was spent, San Antonio no longer had the financial tool it would have needed to put together a competitive offer for James. Reporter Mark Stein followed up by noting that the Spurs are not expected to continue pursuing James now that Harris is off the board, while adding that the Denver Nuggets appear to be entering the chase in a more serious way. The move narrows the field considerably and hands Golden State a real structural advantage heading into the next stretch of free agency. With San Antonio removed from realistic contention, the Warriors now have the clearest path among the remaining group of suitors to actually put the full mid-level exception in front of James this summer. 3 teams remain the most credible challengers: the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Miami Heat, and the newly aggressive Nuggets. Each of them, however, is dealing with cap complications that limit how much they can realistically offer a 4-time MVP still capable of impacting winning at a high level. Miami already committed part of its own mid-level exception to sign guard Tim Hardaway Jr. to a 1-year deal worth $6.5 million. That leaves the Heat without the ability to get anywhere close to a $15 million offer, a gap that becomes very difficult to close through minimum salary fill-ins or minor trade maneuvering. Cleveland's situation is more fluid but no less constrained. The Cavaliers have not yet officially finalized a deal with James Harden, and unless Harden agrees to a bigger pay cut than most expect, Cleveland will not have access to the full exception either. That puts the Cavaliers in a holding pattern, watching their own roster math before they can even think about making a real push. Denver's math is arguably the trickiest of all. The Nuggets' 5 highest-paid players combined for roughly $186 million in salary, a number that leaves almost no breathing room under the tax lines that govern exception usage. For Denver to have access to the full mid-level exception, the front office would likely need to trade away one of those core pieces just to create the space, a move that would reshape the roster around James rather than simply adding him to it. That combination of circumstances is exactly why Golden State's front office continues to treat the Moses Moody trade scenario as a real possibility rather than a hypothetical exercise. The clearest path for the Warriors to sign James using the mid-level exception while still paying Draymond Green a salary in the range of $20 million involves moving Moody's contract off the books. After Golden State's recent agreement to bring back a veteran guard on a biannual exception deal, Green's ultimate salary number could settle closer to $17 million if a Moody trade goes through, but the broader point still holds. The Warriors need a trade partner willing to absorb roughly $12.5 million in salary for a 24-year-old wing currently working his way back from injury and under contract to the 2027 to 28 season. There is reason to believe that trade partner exists. Several rebuilding teams around the league are currently sitting on trade exceptions large enough to absorb a contract of that size, and taking on a young, well-regarded perimeter piece under a multi-year deal is often an appealing proposition for franchises in asset accumulation mode rather than win-now mode. A secondary option involves trading or even releasing Kristaps Porzingis, though league sources in Golden State's own front office thinking treat that path more as an emergency fallback than a primary strategy. It would only come into play if a Moody trade fails to materialize and the front office decides a James pursuit is worth sacrificing front court depth to complete. If Golden State ends up being the only realistic team still able to offer James the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception once free agency fully unfolds, that alone could tip the recruitment in the Warriors' favor. Money isn't everything in these decisions, but for a player weighing his final years in the league, having a suitor that can actually put real numbers on the table separates serious contenders from teams merely making phone calls out of obligation. What stands out most in this entire sequence is the level of urgency Golden State has shown compared to its competitors. While other franchises have been forced into reactive decisions, spending their cap tools on other targets or getting tangled in their own roster math, the Warriors have positioned themselves methodically, protecting their financial flexibility at every turn. That contrast, more than any single report, may end up being a deciding factor in how this recruitment plays out over the coming weeks. Guard Anthony Melton has agreed to a new 2-year contract worth $11 million to remain with the Golden State Warriors, according to ESPN's Shams Charania. The deal includes a player option for the second season, giving Melton some control over his future if he outperforms a contract or if his market changes over the next year. Importantly for Golden State's roster planning, Melton's new deal is believed to have been structured using the biannual exception rather than any portion of the mid-level exception. That distinction matters a great deal given everything else the front office has on its plate this summer. By keeping the mid-level exception untouched, the Warriors preserve their full financial flexibility for a potential run at a marquee free agent, meaning the Melton signing should have essentially no impact on that separate pursuit. To understand why bringing Melton back qualifies as smart business, it helps to look back at how his Golden State tenure began. Back in 2024 free agency, the Warriors gave him the entire non-taxpayer mid-level exception, a significant commitment at the time. Even then, the price looked like a bargain for a 25-year-old defensive specialist who had shot better than 38% from three-point range across his final 4 seasons before arriving in the Bay Area. He profiled as exactly the kind of connective, switchable guard that modern playoff rosters covet. Then the injury hit. Just 6 games into his first season in Golden State, Melton tore his ACL, an injury that typically sidelines players for a full calendar year and often longer before they return to peak form. With the rest of the league fully aware he wouldn't be ready for the start of the following season, his leverage in the market evaporated. He ultimately had to settle for a modest $3.1 million salary just to stay on an NBA roster while he worked his way back. Once healthy again, Melton delivered a genuinely strong season for Golden State. He posted the second-best net rating on the entire roster, and by all accounts did not look limited athletically despite the severity of the injury he was recovering from. His defensive instincts, quick hands, and ability to guard multiple positions returned largely intact, which is often the hardest part in ACL recovery to fully restore. The one soft spot in his game last season was his three-point shooting, which dipped to 29.4%, a notable drop from his career norms. That number alone likely explains why his free agent market once again failed to reflect his overall value. There's a well-established pattern around the league of players who tear their ACLs needing a full extra year beyond their official return before their conditioning, explosiveness, and shooting rhythm fully normalize. If that pattern holds for Melton, there is real reason to expect his outside shooting to rebound significantly in the coming season, closer to the level he showed for years before the injury. That the broader market still treated him as a modest bargain despite a full, healthy, productive season looks, in hindsight, like a mistake by the rest of the league, and a clear win for Golden State. Melton has a long, incredible track record as a plus 3-point shooter, and punishing him this severely for one shooting slump during a return from injury campaign seems to be overcorrecting. If he does return to form from beyond the arc, the Warriors will effectively be getting a player worth the full mid-level exception salary for a fraction of that price. On the other end of the floor, Melton continues to grade out as an excellent on-ball defender, with advanced defensive metrics, placing him in roughly the 85th percentile among his positional peers. His combination of length, anticipation, and physicality makes him a natural fit for a secondary ball handler role, one where he can pick his spots to attack off the dribble, create for others, or simply space the floor depending on the lineup around him. There were stretches last season where Melton looked overburdened offensively, particularly during periods when both of Golden State's top perimeter scorers were sidelined with injuries, and he was asked to carry a heavier playmaking load than his role typically demands. That kind of strain is common for role players thrust into larger responsibilities during injury absences, and it shouldn't be read as a referendum on his overall skill set. Once the roster's top perimeter options return to full health simultaneously, the front office can lean on complementary pieces like Melton to fill gaps rather than asking him to be a primary offensive engine. Even setting aside the team's specific need for perimeter defense, this contract would qualify as strong value on its own merits. Factor in the reality that a separate knee injury to another Golden State wing has left the roster thinner on defensive-minded perimeter depth, and the Melton re-signing looks even more essential. Locking in a proven, switchable defender who profiles as a shooting bounce-back candidate, all while barely touching the team's remaining cap tools, is about as efficient a piece of off-season business as a front office can execute. The move earns a firm grade of A.